then. Hi everyone, my name is Phoebe Fisher and I will be your host for this evening, facilitating a really important and vital discussion on policing of Black communities and also around police accountability. To start off, as I said, my name is Phoebe Fisher. I work with a company called Decolonizing the Archive, which is an organization focusing on, it's kind of a Pan-Africanist archives, focusing on how archives can empower Black communities. And we're supporting Black Thrive in this community consultation. I have a bit of a dual position here as a host, but also as a kind of a young person working with young people in the community, predominantly in the borough of Hackney. I'm also a part of a police monitoring group called Hackney Account, which monitors the police on the overrepresentation of young Black men in stop and search statistics and kind of focusing on issues that face community the Black community the most, such as the use of excessive force and kind of around disproportionality. I also work with young people in the community around issues around Black history, about how history can kind of empower the Black liberation struggle, and also around mental health with young people. We are joined today by a fantastic panelist of young people in the community that are doing absolutely fantastic work. I won't speak too much for them as I'll be introducing them, so they will introduce themselves. I wanted to start off with introducing Jonas. If you wanted to take it away and just give a brief introduction about yourself.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonas. I am a young co-researcher on the REACH study in partnership with King's College London, and our work mainly focuses on exploring the origins of mental health challenges in young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, specifically from areas such as Southwark and Lambeth, and working with schools in order to better the relationship between young people and their mental health. And our work also incorporates a lot on how police interaction affects young people's mental health as well.
Thank you, Jonas. Nubia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Nubia Assata. I'm a published author in collectively my first book, Silent Screams, and my second book, What is Next for Us. Both work to find ways to apply different forms of Black political activity, Black political thought, specifically radical thought, to today's circumstances, and remobilizing Black communities to play more of an active role in radical Black political pursuits.
Great, welcome, Nubia. Kenya, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kenya. So I am a spoken word artist, author, as well as entrepreneur. And I guess a lot of the topics that I speak on are kind of the Black women's experience, Black mental health, and I also work with young women 12 to 18 as a part of my empowerment brand, I Am Queen, to kind of, empower young Black women to kind of use creative expression and their voices as a way to empower themselves and, kind of achieve whatever they put their mind to. So, that's a bit about me.
Welcome, Kenya. Thank you. And finally, Jacob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob. I like to start by saying what I'm most passionate about in terms of where I started. I'm a youth worker through and through. I'm also a board member on the Youth Justice Board. I'm a father, and I am a community activist, very passionate about equity amongst many other things that is needed in this world, especially within the community, especially the Black community. I think we need to have a lot more of a voice in terms of succession planning, ensuring that our upcoming generation are having seats at the table when it comes to making decisions.
Great, welcome, Jacob. As I was saying, I'm very humbled to be in the presence of such passionate young people that, have a heart for community empowerment and also have a lot of awareness around the issues that are affecting young people in the community. Unfortunately, we couldn't have come together on negative terms with the heavy and over policing and disproportionality of Black communities in London. But as I said, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, but also thank you to the audience as well. It's really important to have community voices represented in all levels of police scrutiny, procedures, and accountability. So thank you. I will be asking the panelists a series of questions to kind of kickstart, discussion around community voices in policing. And then I will open up the discussion with Nathan to a Q&A. That's a chance for audience members to participate and ask the panelists any questions that they have around their opinions on lived experiences of, policing and police accountability. I'm just going to kickstart the discussion as I'm conscious of time and I just want to utilize it very effectively. So I'm going to start with asking the panel the first question and just come in with your answer, or I will bring you in whatever way. So the first question is, how can we make sure that community-led police accountability includes the right people and is representative of all Londoners, including Black Londoners' experiences on the police? We want to start with you, Jacob.
Yeah, it's such a big question, and for me, really, it's more about what does systemic change look like. I think in order for this to take place, we need to recognize the system in terms of how we see policing takes place. It can be very personal experience led, and I feel like that has a huge shape in terms of what is possible and what isn't possible. So I give you a simple example. If a young person starts as a police cadet, for example, and has positive relationships with the police from that police cadet experience, they're more likely to be a part of anything that helps support the police in what they do in terms of not just policing the community, but just being effective in regards to law and order. I think that's a big contrast in terms of the other side of it, basically experiencing a family member being wrongfully arrested and having a negative experience with the police service. I think you're less likely in some ways to be engaged. So I think for me, in terms of making that systemic change, it's about recognizing where we can have a voice. And I think it tends to be very straightforward around you either become a police officer or you be the person who's like an activist in the community and protest against the police. But there's not really a clarity in terms of where exactly you can have these spaces. And a good example is the independent advisory group that every local borough has. You even have some boroughs that have the youth advisory group, which gives you an opportunity to hold the police to account. Obviously, there's many other spaces as well, but I think someone, and I think local councils can be at the forefront of this, kind of highlighting to the community, these are the various ways you can hold the police accountable, and repeating that information every year, because there's always a group of people who may not hear about it. And I'm tired of seeing experts or people saying, we've been doing this for 40 years. Like, so what? Say it again every year, because we need to make sure that that information is widely spread as much as possible.
Thank you, Jacob. Yeah, the issue around knowledge sharing is definitely a vital one. Kenya, would you like to come in with a response?
I'm more than happy to jump in if needed.
Kenya, you're muted. If you want to go, Nubia, and we return to Kenya.
Of course. In terms of the specific question regarding individuals and who needs to be represented in these community-led groups, we never want specific voices being held above others. More importantly, we do not want certain communities being drowned out by prioritization of others. What we do have to acknowledge is what communities, and even if we look specifically at the report that was carried out through the Met Police literally this month, what communities are being targeted and what communities are victims of the Met Police and policing across the UK. And what we see, just statistically, black men are some of the biggest victims of policing. Women are often failed by police the most, whether those are women actually working within the police force, women that have filed reports of being victims of rape or sexual assault. In these cases, just going under the radar once they're entered into the force. And so, of course, making sure that there are women, men, and also non-binary individuals from a multitude of ethnic backgrounds that are represented in these groups, making sure that we are targeting the issues that are being, highlighted, and we are very clear what we're trying to do in these pursuits, and we're targeting the issues that are at hand.
Thank you for your response. Jonas, would you like to contribute?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the contributions from both Jacob and Nubia. I also think that in terms of, well, in relation to proper accountability, I think in order to get a really representative group of people, these conversations need to be happening with people from all backgrounds, with all sorts of experiences with the police, whether positive or negative, because I think at the end of the day, the only way we can ensure proper accountability and proper change is having like a really diverse and really different set of people that can share their knowledge and share their experiences. I think also there needs to be quite an even representation of young people as well, because in many of these conversations about accountability, I don't think they're as inclusive of young people as they should be, given the fact that especially in recent times, young people have been specifically affected by the actions of the police. So I think proper accountability can only happen if we have a diverse range of people from diverse experiences, but also if we have a lot of inclusion with young people who maybe have experiences with the police or know people with experiences, so that they can provide their perspectives as well, because we are the future generation, and many young people would want to put in input, suggestions, and input change that they can see lasting throughout their lifetime.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic response, Jonas, and from everyone on the youth panel. I think, just to echo what you were saying, how, people have positive and negative interaction with the police will definitely change the outlook on policing, and kind of engagement needs to happen at all areas, regardless, and be very inclusive, but also to echo the voices of the people who have experienced disproportionality within them statistics, vulnerable people, young people, with women as well. So I think it's really important to highlight that lived experience as well in these community scrutiny panels. Thank you all for your response to that question. I'm just going to move on to our second question now, which is, if you had a blank page to design a community-led police accountability procedure in London, which powers or areas of policing practice should communities be involved in scrutinising? If we wanted to perhaps start with Nubia this time, if you wanted to jump in with a response.
I think when this question's first been asked, there's three areas that pop into my mind. Of course, this is a phenomenon that we've been aware of before the report on the Met Police, but malpractice in policing operates at a multitude of levels and departments. I think scrutiny should be applied to areas of police force that are meant to deal with, as I aforementioned, sexual assault and rape cases. A lot of these times, once these cases are reported, they're not prioritized. The report highlighted that hundreds of rape cases and evidence for rape cases are being ruined by simply not being taken care of, whether that's in the forensic department. There was a case where a whole collection of rape evidence was ruined because a police officer put his lunchbox in the fridge. And this just, I think, is emulating of the lack of care and how these cases aren't prioritized. I think the second area of scrutiny that's required is the level of stop and start searches for Black men, specifically Black young boys, who tend to be more likely to be stop and search if traveling collectively. And lastly would be how people with mental health issues are dealt with by the police. There's been many cases where people, autistic individuals, people with schizophrenia, etc., have been treated, often physically treated horribly by police due to a lack of understanding, mainly because of a lack of education through the police force, but that being manifested through a lack of care, understanding of how to deal with these individuals when they're going through manic episodes, etc., meltdowns, or sensory overloads, and an excuse of not knowing of how to deal with these situations enough. As we know, this is a systemic issue, and therefore dealing with these problems come from the root henceforth.
Yeah, thank you, Nubia. That's really, really insightful. And, within that response, you've not only identified the areas that police need to be held accountable, which is violence against women with kind of mishandling evidence, but also around kind of mental health and neurodivergency. We've also identified police powers as well, which is Section 60, or better known as stop and search. So yeah, thank you for that really well thought out answer. Jonas, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think one of the main areas that I think communities should be very involved in scrutinizing is obviously stop and search. I think seeing the effects of stop and searches on young Black men and just on young Black people in the community in general, this has been sort of a pattern that has continued on for years. And I think that definitely stop and search should be one of the powers that communities should be heavily involved in scrutinizing, because it's an issue that affects so many members of the community. A lot of young Black people have had their mental well-being affected, their mental health affected from being subjected to stop and searches. So I think that input and that scrutiny from young people who have been through that, from families of young people who have been through stop and searches as well, should be an area that we focus on a lot. Because it's an issue that affects the community.
Yeah, absolutely, Jonas. Stop and search disproportionately affects young people between the ages of 11 and 28. So thank you for highlighting that. Kenya, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I just kind of want to add, I guess, based on what Nubia said, another area that kind of comes to my mind is use of force. I think that it's important that communities have a say in how police use force and how, it's almost justified in a sense. So this could, include everything from reviewing policies and procedures for use of force and establishing clear standards of how it should be used, because, prevention is better than cure. And I kind of feel like everything should start with building trust in the first place, encouraging young people to speak on these kinds of things. They have to have some sense of trust of, dealing with the issue at the root. So yeah, one that kind of is key to me, I would say, is use of force. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Kenya. Absolutely. Excessive force against Black communities is, certainly a problem kind of around handcuffs and taser uses, but also kind of, you know, is rooted in institutional racism and this kind of fear of Black bodies. And that justifies, you know, the fear of the police, but we know it doesn't. It has a very, very harmful impact on Black communities. So thank you. Jacob, would you like to contribute?
Yeah, I think in terms of there's a scrutiny question in terms of where should we place the most of our accountability and scrutiny for the police. For me, is really on. I would also want to say stop and search, but I think it goes more than that. I think it goes as well as the police training and who's actually wanting to be police officers. I think if we look at recent data that actually shows in terms of those young people who are arrested, over 70% or at least just under 80% don't get custodial sentences, but who are young people who are on remand. So for me, it says something. It says that basically, in short, they're arresting young people, but they are not getting prison sentences. So why is it that they're being targeted in the first place? Why is it that they're being arrested? And why is that not leading to a custodial sentence? Not that we would want them to have one, but why is it that, you know, they're going through the system effectively? And then we talk about reoffending rates when reoffending rates are high as well. What is it that's going on with young people in terms of their experiences? And I'm saying in particular Black young people in their experiences that is so disproportionate to other groups of young people. We have to call it what it is. It's racism. You know, I like to argue the point that when we use the word overrepresentation, we tend to beat around the bush. But something's happening within its system. And I think the judicial system needs to take responsibility for why we have this inequity in the first place. So for me, what I would really be interested in is number one, how are we training our police officers and how do we have correct checks and balances? Because I think information is a big part to solving this issue. As I said before, is one thing talking about just having conversations about police accountability. But I remember saying this like a decade ago when I was around 16, that it's a police service, not a police force. And I was really happy to be a part of this conversation when Black Thrive, you know, labeled these conversations, you know, a service, not a force, because it makes a difference. It makes people understand that when we talk about policing, it's about consent rather than being done towards us. And, you know, I am tired of having the same experiences that my grandparents had. That's one experience I don't want to be having. And unfortunately, I was born in the US and came to this country when I was 11, but somehow I managed to have similar experiences to my cousins in the States. It says something about something that needs to change. And I think a lot of it has to do with us recognizing who the police needs to be accountable to. It's to the public, it's to the community, it's to us. You know, we pay our taxes, and not only that, we're citizens. And I feel like until we get to the point where we say not only enough is enough, but we need to get to the point where we start redesigning the system itself, nothing, in my personal opinion, would change.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. I couldn't agree more. You know, having more publicity around the narrative that the police rule by consent of the people. So yeah, that's a really great answer. Thank you. Moving on to our third question. What community level could these groups function at, and how should they be structured, these community police scrutiny groups? Anyone has any thoughts on that? Perhaps I'll come with Jonas first.
Yeah, I think what would be best in envisioning these community group discussions would be just creating an environment that is as comfortable as possible for members of the community to, you know, properly speak about their experiences without feeling intimidated, without feeling out of place. I think I wouldn't say that it needs to be like I wouldn't say that it should be informal, because I think that could kind of suggest that the content that is being spoken about by members of the community is trivial or that it's you know, unimportant. But I think it should be an environment that is comfortable enough for groups in the community to share all their experiences, and share effectively their their grievances, but also their suggestions as well. So in terms of what that could look like, I think definitely face-to-face discussions with different members of different communities. And I think that could be the basis of very successful and very productive conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Kenya?
Yeah, well, I feel for myself, obviously these kind of community-led like accountability groups could function on many different levels, as locally, by borough or citywide, to be honest. And I don't think there's any kind of one group to narrow it down to, because I think that the conversation needs to kind of get its momentum in a way. But I guess some key considerations would be things such as inclusivity and diversity, collaborative decision making, kind of clear roles and responsibilities, or to kind of, I guess, home in on just accountability, as every experience, like, Jonas said, is different. And especially for young people, there's many different types of young Black women and young Black boys with all different experiences that kind of cross over. So yeah, I guess it needs to focus on, I'd say inclusivity, diversity, and collaborative decision making. That's the kind of main things that kind of stand out to me. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Jacob?
I think I remember they have these in the West Midlands, but they had like youth crime commissioners. And I remember in 2013 when they had a young lady who was there, but she had to step down because of some tweets that really wasn't nice, that she was young. I saw in the media the idea of giving young people a position of leadership within police and was publicized. I know they still have some youth crime commissions in the country, but I would really advocate for more young people to be in elected positions within policing in terms of scrutiny. One, because I feel like in this country, we failed to give young people positions of leadership earlier on. Somehow, I feel like without anyone saying it out loud, you reach 40 and then all of a sudden you're responsible, and we all know the older you get, at least in my case, I'm 29, that you always feel like you're smarter than you was last year. And it's like, why did I not do this? Essentially what I'm saying is that leadership is based on experience. And from a community perspective, if we're going to have scrutiny or looking at the police to be better, we need to be accountable as well. So I really strongly believe that we should have more elected positions for people within the community to be representatives of the community. Because I think one thing that's worth noting, we're not a homogenous group of people. And I can talk for the Black community. For me, when people say that, quote unquote, I'm like, which one? Are you talking about the Muslim Black community, the Caribbean Black community, the West African community? I can go on and on. Who are you talking about? One way to create consensus amongst a group of people is creating these positions, allowing that process to be transparent in terms of how you vote, allowing the information that's needed to be a part of the conversation accessible, from language to imagery to different platforms, and allow it to be part of our education system when it comes to educating young people. I remember being PSHE lessons and I enjoyed it. Some of my friends thought it was just a free lesson, but it would be nice to be in those lessons and kind of understand how my country operates, because it means that as I'm getting older, I'm able to be a part of those decision-making mechanisms. And it's hard to think about how do we scrutinize police if we don't know exactly how to do that from a political point of view as well. So there's a catch-22 here, I'm basically saying. But essentially, if we give more people positions of leadership earlier on and allow it to be a space where you also get the right training, because I think resources needs to be a part of this as well. There's no point giving somebody a position in terms of how groups should function, but you don't give them the resources to do the job they've been asked to do.
Yeah, there's definitely an issue around kind of knowledge and power, being in a position of power that can implement changes. Thank you, Jacob. Nubia, would you like to go?
I agree with Jacob in terms of giving young people responsibility. I think it's important that we start right at the foundation. I mean, 37% of children attend a school where there are regular police presence. And I'm sure that's like 979 schools. And many Black children, as we've already mentioned, experience force and negative experiences with police from the age of 14 onwards. And I think it's paramount that we have a tier of police accountability groups that are, represented by school children. So in terms of geographical structure or whatever we want to, the way we structure these groups, I think it's a good idea within boroughs, schools within the borough to, nominate and vote for individuals to be on a borough-wide board. Through that, it ascends locally into a city-wide board, and to make sure that this is really, really, really forcing our government and the Met Police to be accountable, and this to be maintained onwards, making sure that at these citywide boards there's a member of Parliament or a member of the Met Police present, so these conversations are actually going directly where they need to go, to the people that have the responsibility and the access to resources to implement change. And I think it's also really important that these conversations are had so that there's a constant influx of recorded evidence of how force is operating on these levels. One of the most important reasons why a lot of these things go under the radar is because there's not recorded information. It's almost like people didn't believe racism existed until people were doing racial reports, which is ridiculous. And so if these conversations are only being had between oppressed groups and not between oppressor groups, unfortunately, no progress can really be made. So there needs to be recorded evidence that people can refer back to. This person said this in this year, cited by this person, and it really just forces accountability onwards.
Sorry, Phoebe, I was looking for the clapping hands, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, some really powerful statements coming from you guys. So yeah, thank you for all your contribution. You all have a very, very clear, comprehensive understanding of how the police system works and issues affecting young people. So again, I'm very grateful for your contributions. Just moving on, as I'm just conscious of time, and I just want to make sure that we get through all of our questions. Moving on to the question, how could the groups work with each other across London, with the Metropolitan Police and with MOPAC, the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime? Nubia, how about you jump in again?
I think one of the most important products or outputs of these conversations has to be consequences. So working together to put in place effective consequences that not only consolidate to the entire Met Police or the entire country the importance and the significance of this implemented accountability, but also to make sure it's clear that this is being taken seriously, and this the importance of this won't just dissipate in a couple of years. I mean, Sir Mark Rowley, I think that's the head of the Met Police, himself refused to see this as an institutional problem. So in the report, he said, this is an issue with racist individuals, sexist individuals within the police force, and he refuses to see it as an institution and problem itself. So I think what has to be produced is consequences that can be delivered towards individuals, also collectives and institutions. And that's the only way to incentivize change. One of the things that I always say, and I think is a core part of the politics I try to deliver, is that if it's not threatening, it's not effective, or if it's not threatening, it's not radical. And I think radical change is the only significant change that can really be implemented. And therefore, if what we're doing does not threaten the existence of a status quo, there's not really any point of us going along with it. And therefore, we have to produce consequences that can basically disincentivize the current actions of the police force, police service, as Jacob said. So yeah, I think working together to create consequences as well as solutions, and in those two in hand, I think it could be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of radical accountability is definitely needed. Also, the police have to be receptive to change. You can only be receptive to change if you admit that there's a problem to begin with, which unfortunately we're just not seeing that. Jonas, would you like to contribute?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on, I think, in relation to the groups working with each other across London, I think there definitely needs to be a level of cohesiveness in terms of the activity that all the groups across London are doing. I think obviously there are certain areas where the community issues are felt more, or the presence of community inequalities with the police is felt on a greater level. But I still think the level of scrutiny and sort of almost pressure applied needs to be similar and cohesive throughout the whole of London, so that there's not like one specific area that thinks that they have less work to do than another area in London. I think what the weakness of policing and the challenges of policing in one area is representative of the problems in the police in London as a whole. So I do think that cohesiveness in the approaches in different areas is a way that the groups can work with each other across the capital.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Kenya, would you like to contribute?
Yeah, so sorry. Excuse me. Yeah, I think I think a key kind of theme in everything is kind of accountability, as well as kind of education and spreading information. So I guess one way is kind of these organizations, Metropolitan Police, as well as the Mayor of London's Office for Policing and Crime, is to kind of advocate for policy change and reforms with the Metropolitan Police based on, kind of real community feedback and concerns, which can kind of happen or be taken from things like advisory boards and things like that. As well as kind of, again, on outreach and education, community-led kind of police accountability groups to kind of engage in community outreach and education efforts to kind of just increase awareness as a whole. And so that we can understand police practices, community rights, and kind of access the available resources or put the necessary resources in place to kind of advocate for change.
Yeah, absolutely. Jacob, would you like to come in?
I think I agree with exactly what Kenya and Nubia just said, so I won't reply to this question because I think what they said encompasses what I believe as well.
Yeah, exactly that. Thank you, Jacob. So in terms of these community scrutiny groups, what support could MOPAC, the Mayor's Office for Crime and Policing, what support could they give these groups, thinking in terms of resources, funding and training? Jacob, perhaps you could begin that discussion.
I think in terms of support, I think one thing for me, which is extremely important, is continuity and consistency. I've been privileged to be a part of public discourse around young people in decision making from 16, so just over at least a decade. And for me, what I realized in my short space of time of experience in life, things tend to go around in circles. So I think there needs to be an onus of what does a long-term plan look like. So if we talk about what could be put in place in terms of making sure the success of whatever it is that happens, is that the conversation is looking down 10 years. It's not looking, just for today or just for 2 years. We're saying we're making decisions for the next 10 years. Is going to be across political parties. So whoever is in leadership is going to agree to what decisions are being made. And so we allow the community to develop alongside what is taking place. I think we can take a page out of America's book. America's completely imperfect, and I'm saying that as an American, but they do have something right. They're really good at profiling community people who are making impact. And I feel like in this country, we only do that when someone reaches a certain milestone or they get notoriety outside of our country. Then we say, look at this great campaign and look at the change that they're making. I feel like what we need to be good at and what MOPAC can probably support is if there is amazing, and when I say amazing, I don't use that word lightly. If there's people who's putting their blood, sweat, and tears in terms of pushing the narrative forward, in terms of making a better police service, and they're from the community, and they're putting in that work, they're compensated, number one. Number two, they're giving the support and the PR so people know who they are, because there's nothing worse. And I've seen people who've given 40 years of their life, and I'm thinking about a few people personally, and they get nothing in return. And it's like, when you got the upcoming generation who want to make change and they see people like that, it could divert you away from doing public service. You're like, why should I sacrifice so much and get nothing in return? I feel like we need to start respecting people for their time and their selflessness. So I guess for me, it's just looking after those people who do give their service. So if someone's giving their time, it's not about saying, oh, your time is always in exchange for money, but we have to eat. Austerity was real when they told us austerity wasn't happening. Now they're talking about cost of living. Since I've been born, it's been cost of living. It hasn't changed. So, we need to be realistic in terms of what meaningful engagement looks like, especially if we're thinking about it from inner city perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. The issue of funding is, it's always a concern for individuals and organisations working to hold the police to account. Jonas, would you like to contribute?
Yeah, well, firstly, I just want to really echo and reiterate Jacob's point about having long-term plans in place. I think, there can only be so many community discussions and consultations and conversations that can happen without seeing real change and without being able to follow, okay, this community conversation happened, where did it lead to? What was the outcome? What ultimately changed as a result of this and as a result of the work that was done around it? Also, I think to add to the question on more of a young person's perspective, I think there are a lot of young people who experience the challenges with regards to policing, with regards to the police's effect on the community, and have contributions to bring and valuable experiences to bring, but don't necessarily know how to do so, or don't necessarily have the platform, or necessarily have the skills to do so. So I think in terms of something that MOPAC could do, empowering young people from communities to be able to properly speak about their experiences and to just get the most contributions out of people who have lived experiences of these challenges.
Yeah, I agree. Kenya?
Yeah, I guess I'll echo what Jenna said about kind of making young people kind of the focus, because it's quite obvious that we're the kind of on the receiving end of half of kind of the cases and the things that are going on. And even for myself personally, it can be quite, deflating to kind of speak about the same things kind of again and again and not have, action plan and long-term kind of goals set for actual change, to the point where I feel like young people can feel like, you know what, this is just how things are, and what is my voice going to kind of like make different. So that's why I kind of think it's important to kind of keep the conversation going. And if funding was put in place for certain things, kind of having stuff like, outreach programs and community events and money being put behind actually bringing people together and young people together and being like, your voice is heard and this is the action, this is the change, and this is how we're holding ourselves accountable. As well as, I guess, just training and development opportunities for kind of community-led police accountability groups, and that could be in the form of kind of workshops or community engagement, but just kind of not, just allowing young people not to feel silenced, but to feel heard, and every kind of case or situation be an opportunity to kind of change things. So, yeah.
Definitely. Nubia, would you like to share your thoughts?
I think there's two spheres in which funding needs to be directed towards. In terms of actual funding within the funding, but the way that training can be delivered within the police force would be effective critical race theory training, training on understanding ways in which sexism manifests and operates on all levels, training on force, as Kenya mentioned earlier, training on mental health issues and how to manage individuals with mental health issues, especially at point of arrest. I think this training can even extend towards like leading assemblies within schools, within members of MOPAC. And then on the other sphere in which how this funding can come towards the community, I think there needs to be resources to implement consistent social media presence so that this can be held accountable to public scrutiny, seeing how these measures are being implemented, and I guess how they're being manifested over a long period of time, so it can be scrutinized by the public, and it's not something that's very hushed away and like in-house. I also think, kind of related to what Kenya was saying, I think it's very, very important that this isn't just a look in on the police, but also the communities that are victimized by the police. And so it's important that we're actually financially empowering these communities, providing opportunities at a young age for young Black children, diverting them from a lot of lifestyles that they're often directed towards out of lack of choice and lack of alternative opportunities. You know, youth community groups and buildings don't really exist anymore, and a lot of the reason why young people, especially young Black boys, end up in problematic situations is really out of boredom and out of a lack of other option, and out of community isolation, and just looking for a family structure outside the family household. So yeah, also consistent assessment. So whether this is like twice a year, there's a national board, again, something that produces like an officer style report that is open to public scrutiny, again, creating an increasing incentive to show these problems are solved, that the police force is actively kind of whipped into adequate shape. So yeah.
Thank you, Nubia. Thank you for all of your really profound answers to my questions, to the consultation questions. I just also wanted to kind of echo Jonas's point as well about, you know, having these community scrutinies in place, but also having a safe space in which we can do that, because protecting, you know, youth voices and experiences should be at the forefront of any policy. But not only just safe space to hold the police to account, but also safe spaces where the community can heal from the trauma that's already been done historically to Black communities as well. And you're right with the increasing kind of closing down of youth centres and places where the youth can kind of come together and heal and discuss and you know, scrutinise is becoming a bit scarce in our community. So exactly that. I'm going to ask Nathan to come back in to open the panel to a Q&A for our panelists. I know the audience has some questions for our fantastic young people. So if Nathan, if you wanted to begin that discussion.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Phoebe. So we have a few questions from the audience. So there's a question from Sandra Beaton, and she's asking about the application of the public sector equality duty to operations. So this requires police and other agencies to co-produce the safety of their communities with those communities that are subjected to particular focus. So essentially, youth, under 25s, Afro-Caribbean and Somali. So she's asking, how can this equality duty be addressed? I'll also publish it so you can see it.
I think to answer that, I'm not fully understanding the whole question, but what I would say is, in terms of that existing in the first place, some people don't know it exists. So how can you scrutinize something and be a part of a conversation you don't know it exists in the first place? And for me, that's, I think, in different ways we've all kind of addressed that issue, is that a lot of the times you, one, have to be in the know, or two, have to be a certain level of a professional to be able to understand, you know, how safeguarding is actualized within your community and who's around the table making those decisions.
Just to bounce off of that, there's another thing on just like, I guess, how highlighted these things are within the public and public scrutiny. For example, COP27, all those conferences have a lot of, they're highlighted so well by social media, by the news, by media just generally. And I think that level of accessibility for the community and just the general public to hold these community-led groups, and also the police and all the institutions that are linked to this accountable. So essentially what Jacob is saying, one of the ways to facilitate these things is having more people have access to the information that they even exist.
And can I just quickly add to that? I think, you know, if we're saying we're a democracy as a country, if we're saying we are in a society that's open and transparent, and we have certain values, British values that we want to believe in and adhere to, then that has to be actualized in how we educate our society. I think we tend to use a family as a scapegoat, or the family should be teaching the family that in terms of kids or whatever. But it's like, hold up, wait. As I said before, we're a democracy. How do you vote? How do you get involved in these things? How does local government work? What is the processes? And what you find quite quick, not to bring it to politics, but we talk about the issue around votes to 16. The arguments they give is that young people are not educated, and young people are emotional and rash, etc. I've met a lot of adults who are extremely impulsive, and the only difference that separates them from us young people is the fact of age. So I think it's really about, how do we educate our population? Maybe we need to start sending adults back to school, and maybe school needs to change fundamentally as well.
Thank you for your answer so far. I can also read off a another one. So we have one here from Chris. So Chris is asking, should we trust the police in all their activities, or should we keep watch and be vigilant all the time?
I think there's an issue of trust here that is almost innate within a lot of Black communities. I've been in many situations where just the sound of a siren will make a group of grown men just flinch immediately. And so naturally we take a vigilant front because we don't trust the police. We've never been treated with any sort of kindness from the police. A lot of the circumstances that we find the Black community in statistically are a byproduct of over-policing, whether that just be disenfranchisement or just high numbers of broken families due to, you know, levels of imprisonment of Black communities. So any sort of vigilance, I would never and shouldn't ever be berated by Black communities. I'm very vigilant of police. I don't trust the police as it stands right now. If we want to, I guess, be productive, as long as these community forums and the people leading them, for example, the Mayor of London, if he shows genuine intention to implement the changes and the solutions that we present, then I think we can move forward and try and be a little bit more positive in the way that we approach these things. But I don't think it's something whereby we have to change our attitude toward the police. The police themselves have to change their behavior, and that way we can then, as a second byproduct, continue to change our attitude toward them. I think it's a two to tango sort of situation. And as Jacob mentioned, it's a service. And so until the service changes and the service improves, I don't think we have any obligation to change the way that we view the police. So, yeah.
Thank you, Nubia. And just keep an eye on time. So I'll ask one more question from the Q&A box. So this one is from Graham, and I think he's referencing the recent case report, which is quite poignant to the work that's happening right now and what we're discussing right now. So he mentions the police are institutionally racist, sexist, and homophobic, and he asks, why not get rid of them?
I think it's easier. I don't know about you guys. I think it's easier said than done. And I always the argument I always give to people in terms of getting rid of, quote unquote, the police, the moment you become a homeowner or you own an asset or you grow a family, whatever it might be, where you're level of control is outside of yourself. You care about how you are safe, how you look after things around you. So the idea of policing does become a necessity in terms of society. You can't control everyone's behavior. That being said, going back to the previous question around trust, I can trust the police when I'm able to hold them accountable. They go hand in hand. It's like running a business. Do you trust the employees? To a certain extent, of course, because you've employed them, but you still got CCTV, you still do training, you still do appraisals, you still have checks and balances so that trust is not eroded for whatever reason and taken advantage of. I don't trust the police because we cannot hold them accountable, which goes back to Nubia's point around, what's there, like the mayor of London and other key people who hold the police accountable. So in one sense, yes, we can disband them. There's been conversations around different versions of how we can police in the UK, maybe similar to America, where you got the FBI, CIA, and federal police, etc. But I think, before we even get to that conversation, we should be thinking about, do everyone know who their borough commander is? Do everyone know that they can join a independent advisory group? Do everyone know that they can become a responsible or appropriate adult in their police stations? Do everyone know what the law says in terms of stop and search, and allowing that to become common knowledge? It shouldn't be reactionary. It should just be one of the things as a citizen to make sure your rights are not being approached on.
If I could come in and answer this, I think that question is definitely the point that I've arrived at, kind of working around reformist policies with my police monitoring group, engaging with the police every week, every month, in these things, and just not being taken seriously and respected by the police. We've kind of now removing our efforts to engaging with the police and focusing more on the community empowerment. How can the community defend themselves against the police by know your rights training through all these different kind of mechanisms, like investing in community education and things like that? Because I feel like when you're working with the police and every kind of years new kind of consultations come out and new data comes out, new reports come out every decade, but we're still at this point where Black people are still getting killed by the police. So for me, it's kind of like, I don't necessarily think the police system's broken. I think it's doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to maintain the status quo. So kind of Jacob was saying about how it becomes important when it comes to protecting private property. But, a lot of, Black communities marginalized communities don't even have access to the means to own private property. So it does become kind of a question of class, and kind of, and the abolitionist struggle is one that I'm more likely leaning towards due for my engagement in scrutinizing the police.
I have to say thank you so much for answering those questions, and thank you yet again for joining us today. I recognize